One rainy morning in Lagos, Mr. Johnson, the richest man in town, was furious. He paced around his kitchen, upset that his chef, Mama Teo, wasn't there early to prepare his breakfast. When she finally came, she looked tired and weak. She had been sick, but Mr. Johnson didn't care. "Why are you late?" he shouted, ignoring the coughs that shook her small frame. "I pay you well to work, not to be lazy." Mama Teo bowed her head, apologizing softly. She explained that she had been ill all night, but still came to work. Mr. Johnson only scoffed. "Sick or not, my meals come first. If you can't handle it, maybe I need someone else." Hello friends, welcome to Story Pulse TV. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video and share the stories to others. It was a cold, rainy morning in Lagos, and thunder rolled across the sky. Mr. Johnson, the wealthiest man in town, was pacing his large, empty kitchen with an angry frown. His breakfast was late, and he was furious. Mama Teo, his longtime chef, hadn't arrived on time to prepare his meal, and Mr. Johnson, who prided himself on being strict and demanding, couldn't tolerate such behavior. When Mama Teo finally appeared, she was visibly pale and weak. Her hands trembled as she set down her things, and her face was damp with sweat. But Mr. Johnson ignored her tired appearance, his gaze cold and unfeeling. "You're late," he snapped, his voice echoing through the silent kitchen. Mama Teo bowed her head, too exhausted to respond with anything but a faint apology. She explained, her voice barely above a whisper, that she had been ill throughout the night but came as soon as she could. But Mr. Johnson's face hardened. "I don't care if you're sick," he hissed. "I pay you to be here on time, not to make excuses." He dismissed her without a second glance, his words hitting her like blows. Her eyes stung with tears, but she held her head high, finishing her work as best as she could. Deep down, she knew she couldn't stay under such a boss for much longer. Mama Teo returned home that evening, her body aching from exhaustion and her heart heavy with shame. She had given so much to her job, yet all she received was scorn and unkindness. As she entered her modest house, her teenage son, Teo, was waiting for her, concerned as he watched her struggle to walk through the door. He helped her to a chair and handed her some water, his face full of worry. Teo had noticed how hard his mother worked, and it broke his heart to see her so worn down. But tonight, he could tell something was especially wrong. Once she caught her breath, Mama Teo told him everything. She spoke of Mr. Johnson's cruel words and how he had humiliated her despite her dedication. Teo's hands clenched into fists as he listened. His mother had always taught him kindness and respect, but now, all he felt was anger. He stood up, a determined look on his face, and told his mother, "You don't have to work for someone who doesn't respect you. I'll make sure you're safe and taken care of." That night, Teo made a vow to himself. Someday, he would make Mr. Johnson understand the true meaning of respect. Over the next few years, Teo worked harder than ever. He took odd jobs and saved every penny he earned. He studied relentlessly, driven by the promise he had made to his mother and the hope of a better life. Each day, he carried the memory of Mr. Johnson's treatment toward his mother, fueling his desire to succeed. Teo was determined to rise above his circumstances and create opportunities for himself and his family. He moved on to bigger jobs, making a name for himself in the business world, always keeping his mother's well-being as his priority. Meanwhile, Mr. Johnson continued to grow his wealth, unaware of Teo's quiet rise. In Lagos, his name was well known, but he was feared rather than loved. His employees knew he demanded nothing less than perfection, and anyone who dared to defy him faced swift consequences. Yet, he felt untouchable, oblivious to the resentment building around him. Little did he know that a young man he once dismissed as insignificant was patiently working his way up, waiting for the perfect moment to show him the power of respect. As Teo climbed higher, he made connections in business, becoming more skilled in finance and leadership. His hard work paid off, and he eventually became a partner at a respected firm. His story inspired those around him, as they saw how a young boy from a humble background could achieve great things. However, Teo never forgot where he came from or the struggles he had witnessed. He remained grounded, focused, and committed to giving his mother a life of peace and dignity, far from the days of being humiliated by Mr. Johnson. Back in Lagos, Mr. Johnson's fortune grew, but so did his problems. His employees began to leave due to his harsh treatment, and his once thriving company faced challenges. He tried to hire replacements, but his reputation as a difficult boss made it nearly impossible. Business partners were wary of working with him, and rumors spread about his attitude toward those who worked under him. Little by little, the cracks in Mr. Johnson's empire began to show, and he found himself alone and struggling, though he refused to admit it. One day, Teo received an unexpected phone call. A colleague informed him that Mr. Johnson's company was in financial trouble and was looking for investors to stay afloat. Teo's heart skipped a beat, recognizing the opportunity he had been waiting for. After all these years, the tables had turned, and now he was in a position of power. The same man who had humiliated his mother was now on the verge of losing everything and was seeking help. Teo knew this was his chance to confront Mr. Johnson, but he wanted to ensure the timing was perfect. Instead of rushing, Teo spent weeks gathering information about Mr. Johnson's business, watching as it continued to spiral downward. His colleagues and connections noticed his interest, and some even advised him to reconsider, but Teo was resolute. He wanted Mr. Johnson to feel the same helplessness his mother had felt that rainy morning. So, he waited patiently, planning every detail of his next move, ensuring that Mr. Johnson would understand the true cost of his actions. As Teo continued his careful planning, he arranged to meet with some of Mr. Johnson's former employees. Listening to their stories, he discovered that his mother wasn't the only one mistreated by Mr. Johnson. Many spoke of long hours, harsh words, and thankless tasks. Teo's resolve only strengthened as he saw the impact of Mr. Johnson's arrogance on so many lives. Determined to act with both justice and wisdom, Teo refined his plan, ensuring it would deliver a lasting lesson that Mr. Johnson would never forget. Meanwhile, Mr. Johnson's company continued to struggle. Investors backed out, employees quit, and clients turned to more compassionate competitors. Rumors about his behavior spread like wildfire, tarnishing his reputation. Finally, faced with the very real threat of losing everything, Mr. Johnson was left with no choice but to approach new investors. As fate would have it, the promising young investor recommended to him was none other than Teo. Unaware of the connection, Mr. Johnson scheduled a meeting, oblivious to the storm that was coming. On the day of the meeting, Mr. Johnson prepared with meticulous care, hoping to make a strong impression on Teo. He needed a lifeline, and his desperation was clear in the crispness of his suit and the nervous tapping of his fingers. When Teo arrived, his calm and confident demeanor caught Mr. Johnson off guard. Teo was now a young man of success and influence, a far cry from the boy Mr. Johnson had dismissed years ago. Mr. Johnson extended a polite smile, unaware of the piercing gaze Teo held as he took his seat. As Mr. Johnson presented his case, Teo listened intently, suppressing any sign of emotion. It took all his willpower to hold back the anger that simmered inside him. This was the man who had disrespected his mother, and now, he was the one begging for help. Teo kept his voice steady as he began to ask questions, each one driving deeper into Mr. Johnson's weaknesses. The billionaire stammered at points, his confidence shaken as Teo dissected his failing business with precision. For the first time, Mr. Johnson felt vulnerable. After the meeting, Teo returned to his office and took a moment to process what he had just experienced. Seeing Mr. Johnson reduced to a desperate man seeking his help had been both satisfying and unsettling. He remembered his mother's pain and humiliation and felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was his chance to turn the tables entirely, but he wanted to do it with integrity, teaching Mr. Johnson a lesson that would linger in his mind forever. Teo began by subtly taking control of certain parts of Mr. Johnson's company. He bought shares, strategically placing himself as a significant influence. Over the following weeks, Teo's presence became stronger within the organization, and he used his position to implement new policies that promoted respect, fair treatment, and better working conditions for employees. The company's culture began to shift, with employees noticing the change. But Mr. Johnson, caught up in his own struggles, didn't yet realize the extent of Teo's influence. As Teo's influence grew, Mr. Johnson's frustration also grew. He began to resent the new rules, feeling as though he was losing control over his own company. The once mighty billionaire, who had always ruled with an iron fist, was now forced to accept policies that valued kindness and respect. He noticed employees smiling more, working with greater enthusiasm. But he couldn't understand why Teo insisted on such measures. After all, he believed that strictness was the only way to run a successful business. One evening, Mr. Johnson tried to confront Teo about the changes, demanding to know why he was softening the company's operations. Teo responded calmly, saying, "Respect brings true loyalty, Mr. Johnson. A happy employee is a hardworking employee." Mr. Johnson scoffed, but deep down, he couldn't argue. For the first time, he questioned his methods, though he didn't yet grasp the lesson Teo was teaching him. Slowly, the seeds of self-reflection were being planted, but the billionaire was far from learning his lesson. Months went by, and Mr. Johnson continued to grapple with the changes Teo was implementing. The company's performance improved, yet Mr. Johnson couldn't fully enjoy the success. He felt as though his power was slipping away, controlled by a young man he barely knew. His frustration grew, but he kept quiet, knowing that he couldn't afford to lose Teo's support. Teo, on the other hand, maintained a calm and professional demeanor, keeping his true motives hidden. However, Teo's restraint was tested when he received a letter from his mother, expressing how proud she was of him. Reading her words brought back the memory of that fateful morning in the kitchen, her exhausted face as she tried to hold back tears. The pain and anger resurfaced, and Teo knew he needed to take the final steps in his plan. He was close to achieving what he had worked for all these years, a moment where Mr. Johnson would fully understand the consequences of his cruelty. The following week, Teo requested a private meeting with Mr. Johnson. The billionaire arrived, his expression a mix of curiosity and irritation. Teo began by discussing the progress of the company, the new policies, and the improvements they had brought. Mr. Johnson nodded, though he was impatient to move on. Then, Teo paused, his voice becoming serious. "Mr. Johnson," he said slowly, "I think it's time for you to understand why I joined your company in the first place." Mr. Johnson's eyebrows furrowed in confusion as Teo recounted the story of his mother, how she had been his chef and how she had been humiliated and dismissed when she was sick. Mr. Johnson's face turned pale as the memory came back to him, the realization settling in. You're her son," he stammered, suddenly feeling small. Teo nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, Mr. Johnson. I am her son. And this was never just business for me." The weight of Teo's words hit Mr. Johnson like a punch, and he realized he was finally facing the consequences of his actions. Mr. Johnson sat in stunned silence, grappling with a flood of emotions. For the first time in his life, he felt truly ashamed. All these years, he had built his empire on fear and authority, believing it was the only way to succeed. But now, faced with the son of the woman he had humiliated, he could see the damage his behavior had caused. He opened his mouth to apologize, but no words came out. Teo's eyes held no anger, only a quiet strength that seemed to magnify Mr. Johnson's guilt. Without another word, Teo stood up and left the room, leaving Mr. Johnson alone with his thoughts. Over the next few days, the billionaire was consumed by memories of his past actions, each one a painful reminder of his arrogance and cruelty. He began to reflect on the people he had wronged, realizing that Teo's mother was not the only one. The guilt gnawed at him, and he found himself questioning everything he had built. For the first time, he understood that respect and kindness were more powerful than wealth and authority. After the confrontation, Teo focused on running the company with integrity, earning respect from everyone who worked there. Employees began to see Teo as a visionary leader who valued each person's dignity. While Teo was busy shaping a positive work environment, Mr. Johnson remained haunted by the past. Memories of his cruelty resurfaced daily, reminding him of his shame. Each time he walked into the office, he saw employees happy and thriving under Teo's influence, a painful contrast to his previous way of leading through fear. Unable to escape his guilt, Mr. Johnson began avoiding people, isolating himself even at work. The power he once held felt meaningless, and he found himself dreading each day. The weight of regret bore down on him, leaving him sleepless at night. One evening, overwhelmed, he returned home and, for the first time in years, admitted his mistakes to himself. It was a crushing realization. His wealth and power meant nothing if he had no one who respected him as a person. Alone in his mansion, he wondered if he could ever find peace again. As the weeks passed, Mr. Johnson's health began to deteriorate. The stress and guilt he carried started to show, both in his appearance and in his work. Teo noticed this, observing the billionaire with a mix of pity and satisfaction. While he had once dreamed of this moment, seeing Mr. Johnson's suffering no longer brought him the satisfaction he had expected. Instead, Teo felt a strange sense of responsibility. After all, he was the one who had planted the seeds of Mr. Johnson's downfall, but he hadn't anticipated the extent of the man's suffering. Teo decided to have a final conversation with Mr. Johnson. He scheduled a meeting in Mr. Johnson's office, a room that once intimidated him. But now, Teo sat with calm confidence, while Mr. Johnson seemed small and frail. "Mr. Johnson," Teo began, "I didn't come here to destroy you. I wanted to teach you a lesson about respect and kindness." Mr. Johnson looked at Teo, his eyes filled with regret. "I see that now," he whispered, barely able to meet Teo's gaze. "I'm sorry for everything." Teo saw the sincerity in his words and felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. After the meeting, Mr. Johnson's remorse deepened. He began visiting former employees and personally apologizing for his past behavior. Each apology felt like a step toward redemption, though he knew it would take more than words to make things right. Teo, meanwhile, watched from a distance, uncertain whether Mr. Johnson's change was genuine or driven by desperation. However, as time went on, Teo realized that Mr. Johnson was genuinely trying to rebuild his character. Inspired by this change, Teo made a decision that surprised even himself. He offered Mr. Johnson a partnership, allowing him to stay in the company, but under Teo's conditions. Teo would remain in control, setting the standards and policies that had improved the company's culture. Mr. Johnson agreed, seeing this as an opportunity to prove his sincerity. Together, they worked side by side, though their relationship was far from friendly. However, they each understood the importance of their roles, and over time, the tension between them eased. Months later, Mr. Johnson's health had improved, and he seemed like a different person. He showed genuine appreciation for the employees, treating them with the respect he had once lacked. Teo saw this transformation and felt a sense of accomplishment. He had achieved what he set out to do, not only for his mother but for everyone who had suffered under Mr. Johnson's harsh leadership. One day, Teo invited his mother to visit the company, wanting her to see the changes he had made. When she arrived, Teo proudly showed her around, introducing her to employees who spoke highly of the new work environment. His mother's eyes filled with tears of pride and gratitude as she witnessed the impact of her son's actions. Finally, Teo brought her to meet Mr. Johnson, who greeted her with a humble apology. "I know no words can undo what I did," he said softly, "but I want you to know that I am truly sorry." She looked at him for a moment, then nodded, forgiving him in her heart as she held on to her son, who had finally brought justice in the most powerful way. The months that followed were full of quiet yet powerful changes. Teo's mother became a regular visitor at the company, often helping employees with small tasks and offering kind words. She was a humble woman, but people felt her warmth and sincerity. Mr. Johnson noticed her presence, too, and found himself strangely grateful for it. Each time he saw her, he was reminded of the pain he had caused and the kindness she had returned instead of hatred. Teo's mother brought a calm, nurturing spirit to the workplace that helped heal old wounds. During one of her visits, Mr. Johnson approached Teo's mother with a heartfelt offer. He began, his voice soft and humble. "I know I can never repay you or Teo for what I did, but if there is anything you need, please let me know." She looked at him with compassion in her eyes. "All I ever wanted," she replied, "was to be treated with respect. Now, seeing how things have changed, I don't need anything else." Mr. Johnson's heart sank with both relief and regret. He realized that, In the end, respect and kindness were all anyone really desired. As Teo's leadership continued to shape the company, he was given recognition beyond anything he'd imagined. Other businesses in Lagos began to notice the success and positive reputation of the company. Teo was invited to conferences and seminars, where he shared his philosophy of respect, kindness, and fairness. His speeches inspired many, and people began looking up to him as a symbol of hope and change. Teo never forgot his original purpose, to make life better for hardworking people like his mother. Meanwhile, Mr. Johnson struggled with the weight of his guilt, but he pushed through, committed to being a better person. He gradually found peace in doing good deeds quietly, like funding education programs and donating to hospitals. The people who used to fear him were now surprised to see this kinder side. Some even began to forgive him, recognizing the efforts he was making to change. Teo observed all of this with a mixture of surprise and satisfaction, realizing that he had sparked something within Mr. Johnson that went beyond revenge. One evening, Teo received an unexpected call from a well-known business association. They wanted to honor him with an award for his contributions to Lagos's business community and his advocacy for employee rights. Teo was thrilled, but he knew this award belonged to his mother as much as it did to him. He invited her to join him at the award ceremony, hoping she would understand how much her influence had shaped his journey. His mother, although shy, agreed, knowing how much it meant to him. At the ceremony, Teo gave a heartfelt speech, thanking his mother for her resilience and kindness. "My mother taught me the value of treating people with respect," he said, looking directly at her. "She taught me that kindness is not a weakness but a strength. Everything I am today is because of her." The audience applauded, touched by his words. Teo's mother felt immense pride, knowing that her struggles and sacrifices had not been in vain. Mr. Johnson, who attended as well, felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was determined to continue proving that he, too, could change for the better. Years passed, and Teo's reputation only grew. He expanded the company, adding new branches across Nigeria. He implemented fair policies, good pay, and benefits for all employees, setting a new standard in the industry. Mr. Johnson remained by his side, but as a changed man. He had become an advocate for fairness and kindness, often sharing his story of regret and redemption with others in the business world. Teo was now a respected leader, and people across Nigeria admired him for his strength and integrity. One day, as Teo and Mr. Johnson stood together looking over the company they had built, Teo turned to the older man. "I didn't expect this, Mr. Johnson," he said honestly. "I started out just wanting to make things right for my mother. But I think we both ended up changing." Mr. Johnson nodded, a tear in his eye. "Thank you, Teo, for giving me a chance to become a better person." They shook hands, a gesture that symbolized the end of a long journey of growth, forgiveness, and transformation. As time went on, Teo's mother became a beloved figure in the company, a symbol of strength and kindness to everyone who worked there. People admired how she'd raised such a remarkable son, and she often shared gentle advice and stories that inspired others. Mr. Johnson grew closer to her, deeply respecting the dignity with which she carried herself despite all that she had endured. He often found himself confiding in her, apologizing in small ways, seeking her guidance even in personal matters. One afternoon, as they sat together in the company's garden, Mr. Johnson finally spoke words he had held back. "I know I can't erase what I did, but I want you to know, if there's ever anything you need, you have my word." Teo's mother smiled softly, laying a gentle hand on his shoulder. "What matters is who you are now, Mr. Johnson," she replied. "People change, and you're a better man today. I'm just grateful my son had the courage to help you see that." Her words left Mr. Johnson feeling both humbled and grateful, knowing he'd found forgiveness he once believed was impossible. The company continued to grow under Teo's leadership. Teo started community programs, offering training to young people in Lagos to help them find good jobs. The company sponsored scholarships for students who showed promise, just like Teo had once needed. Teo's journey from a humble background to a position of influence inspired countless people, and he became a well-known figure throughout Lagos. One evening, Teo's mother watched her son receive an award for his charitable contributions to the city. As he spoke, she reflected on how far they had come since the days of struggle and hardship. Teo dedicated his award to her, acknowledging her strength and sacrifices. "This is for my mother," he said proudly. "Everything I do to honor her and the values she taught me." The audience cheered, and Teo's mother felt tears of pride and joy. Mr. Johnson, seated beside her, clapped with the rest, humbled and inspired by the young man he once wronged. Not long after the award ceremony, Teo decided to take a step he had been considering for a while. He wanted to expand his company's mission to include support for single mothers, remembering the struggles his mother had endured when he was young. He met with community leaders, discussing ways to provide resources, financial support, and career training to mothers in need. He saw it as a way to give back to others who were going through what he and his mother had once experienced. This initiative drew widespread attention and admiration, even beyond Lagos. Other business leaders started taking notice, inspired by Teo's vision. Mr. Johnson felt an immense sense of pride watching Teo turn his hardships into a force for good. "Your son has become a true leader," he told Teo's mother one day. "It's because he had a strong, loving mother like you." Teo's mother smiled, grateful for the impact her son was making on the lives of others, knowing that they were helping to create a better world. The company continued to be a shining example in the industry, known not only for its success but for its compassion and fairness. The employees felt respected and valued, and their loyalty to Teo was unmatched. One day, Mr. Johnson called Teo to his office for a private conversation. He seemed nervous, but there was also a look of determination on his face. "Teo," he began, "I've been thinking about my role here. I feel it's time for me to step down and fully retire." Teo was surprised but respectful. He knew that Mr. Johnson had been contemplating retirement for some time. "Are you sure?" Teo asked. Mr. Johnson nodded, a small smile on his face. "Yes, I think it's time. This company is in good hands, and you've built something greater than I ever could. I want you to continue leading, and I'll be cheering you on from afar." They shook hands, marking the end of Mr. Johnson's journey with the company and the beginning of Teo's sole leadership. After Mr. Johnson's retirement, Teo assumed full control of the company. He quickly began implementing even more positive changes, expanding the company's reach and further solidifying its reputation as a place of integrity and compassion. Teo's mother continued to visit occasionally, proud to see her son making such a difference. People now sought his advice, and his influence grew beyond Lagos to other cities. One afternoon, while walking through the office, Teo thought back to where it all began. The difficult days his mother had endured and the moments of humiliation she had faced. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing he had turned those hardships into something positive, creating a legacy of respect and kindness. Teo's mother had once dreamed of a better life for her son, and now he was making that dream a reality, helping others along the way. As Teo continued to lead the company, he turned his focus towards building a foundation in honor of his mother. The foundation aimed to support single mothers and provide scholarships for young people from underprivileged backgrounds. Teo wanted to ensure that other families wouldn't have to face the struggles his mother had endured. His foundation attracted attention from across Nigeria, and people began to see Teo as more than just a successful businessman. He was a true leader in the community. One day, Teo held a ceremony to launch the foundation. His mother, standing beside him, was moved to tears as she listened to him speak about his motivation. "This foundation is dedicated to my mother, who taught me resilience and kindness," Teo said. "I want every struggling mother to know that there is hope." The audience applauded, and his mother felt an overwhelming sense of pride. She never imagined that her sacrifices would lead to something so meaningful. With the foundation's success, Teo started traveling across Nigeria to promote his vision and gather support from other influential figures. He visited schools, orphanages, and community centers, sharing his story and encouraging young people to work hard and dream big. His words inspired many, and children looked up to him, seeing him as proof that anything was possible with determination. Meanwhile, back at the company, Teo's employees felt a deep sense of loyalty and admiration for their leader. He wasn't just their boss, He was a mentor who genuinely cared about their well-being. Mr. Johnson, who had retired, heard about Teo's work and felt a mixture of pride and remorse, knowing that Teo's compassion and strength had transformed not only the company but also his own heart. One day, Teo was invited to speak at a prestigious conference in Lagos attended by business leaders and government officials. He took the stage confidently, sharing his journey from a young boy who had struggled to a man who had built a company grounded in integrity and compassion. His speech was met with a standing ovation, and people approached him afterward, eager to learn more about his philosophy and the work he was doing with the foundation. Among the attendees was a prominent government official who was deeply moved by Teo's story. She approached him and offered her support, promising to help him expand the foundation's reach. Teo was humbled by her offer, realizing that his efforts were being recognized on a larger scale. His mother watched from the audience, her heart swelling with pride, knowing that her son's kindness and strength had brought him this far. Teo's influence continued to grow, and soon, he began receiving invitations to participate in government initiatives focused on social welfare and education. He accepted, using these opportunities to advocate for policies that would support the underprivileged. His efforts made a significant impact, and people started referring to him as the people's champion. Teo's mother observed how much he had accomplished and felt grateful that he was using his success to help others. As Teo became more involved in these initiatives, he knew that his journey was far from over. He was determined to make a lasting difference, not only in Lagos but across Nigeria. Each time he made a positive change, he thought of his mother's strength and the values she had instilled in him. The hardships they had faced together had shaped him into the man he had become, and he wanted to honor her legacy in every way possible. One day, Teo received a call from a well-known philanthropist who offered to partner with him to expand the foundation's work. The philanthropist had heard of Teo's story and admired his dedication to helping others. Teo was thrilled at the opportunity, knowing that this partnership would allow them to reach even more people in need. Together, they launched new programs that provided vocational training, healthcare, and housing support for families. At the launch event, Teo's mother stood proudly beside him, listening as he spoke about the foundation's goals. "We're here to uplift each other," Teo said passionately. "Together, we can create a world where everyone has a chance to succeed." The audience cheered, and Teo's mother felt a deep sense of peace. She knew that her son's journey was about more than success. It was about giving back and making a difference. As Teo's foundation continued to grow, he received an invitation to meet with the president of Nigeria. The president had heard about Teo's efforts and wanted to discuss how the government could support his foundation's mission. Teo was honored, and he prepared carefully for the meeting, knowing that it could be a turning point in his work. He shared his vision for creating a more equitable society and emphasized the importance of education and support for struggling families. The president was impressed by Teo's dedication and promised to support his foundation through government funding. Teo left the meeting feeling hopeful, knowing that with the government's help, his foundation could reach even more people. His mother was overjoyed when he shared the news with her, and she reminded him of how proud she was of the man he had become. "You're a true blessing to our country," she told him with tears in her eyes. As Teo's foundation began to make an even greater impact, people from all over Nigeria reached out to thank him for his work. Families who had once struggled were now thriving, and young people who had received scholarships from the foundation were pursuing their dreams. Teo was deeply moved by their stories, and he knew that his mother's teachings had been the driving force behind everything he had accomplished. One day, Teo's mother visited a community center that the foundation had helped build. She saw children laughing and playing, families receiving support, and young people learning new skills. She felt overwhelmed with pride, knowing that her son's efforts were changing lives. As she walked through the center, people recognized her and thanked her for raising such an incredible son. Teo's mother smiled, knowing that her sacrifices had not been in vain. Despite his success, Teo remained humble and focused on his mission. He continued to visit schools and community centers, speaking to young people about the importance of kindness, resilience, and hard work. He shared stories of his own struggles and encouraged them to believe in themselves. His words resonated with many, and young people across Nigeria looked up to him as a role model. Meanwhile, Teo's mother reflected on how far they had come. She remembered the days of hardship and humiliation and felt grateful for the strength that had carried them through. She knew that her son's success was a testament to the power of perseverance and kindness. Watching Teo inspire others brought her immense joy, and she felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her journey had led to something truly meaningful. One evening, Teo's mother gathered her son and a few close friends for a small celebration at their home. She wanted to honor Teo's achievements and express her gratitude for the support he had received. As they sat together, sharing stories and laughter, she looked around the room and realized how blessed they were to have each other. Teo thanked his mother for her unwavering love and support. "Mom," he said, "everything I am is because of you. You taught me to be strong, kind, and humble. I hope I've made you proud." She hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes. "You've made me prouder than I ever imagined," she replied. The room fell silent as everyone felt the deep bond between mother and son. Years passed, and Teo continued to lead the foundation with dedication and passion. He received countless awards and honors, but he remained grounded, always remembering his roots and the values his mother had taught him. His work touched the lives of thousands, and his story became an inspiration to people all over Nigeria. One day, Teo's mother fell ill, and Teo stayed by her side, taking care of her as she had once taken care of him. He knew that his mother's love and sacrifices had been the foundation of his success, and he wanted to be there for her in every way he could. Despite her illness, she remained strong, reminding him of the importance of kindness and resilience. As Teo's mother grew weaker, he made sure that she knew how much she meant to him. He spent every moment he could with her, sharing stories and memories. She looked at him with pride, knowing that her son had become everything she had hoped for and more. One evening, as they sat together, she held his hand and whispered, "I'm so proud of you, Teo. You've made my dreams come true." Teo hugged her, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the woman who had shaped his life. He knew that her love and guidance had been the foundation of his journey. In that moment, he promised himself that he would continue her legacy, using his success to uplift others and make a positive difference in the world. After his mother's passing, Teo dedicated himself even more to the foundation. He named a new community center after her, ensuring that her legacy would live on. The center provided support for single mothers, education for children, and resources for families in need. It became a place of hope and inspiration, a symbol of the love and strength that Teo's mother had embodied. People from all over Nigeria visited the center, finding comfort and support in its welcoming environment. Teo felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he was honoring his mother's memory in a meaningful way. Her spirit lived on in the work he did, and he felt her presence guiding him every step of the way. Teo continued to expand the foundation, reaching new communities and helping even more families. His mother's story inspired him, and he wanted to share her legacy with as many people as possible. He traveled to different parts of Nigeria, sharing his mother's values and encouraging others to believe in themselves. As he spoke to people, he saw the impact his words had on their lives. People felt empowered to overcome their challenges, just as his mother had. Teo knew that her legacy would live on through every life he touched, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey they had shared. One day, Teo received a letter from a young boy who had been inspired by his story. The boy wrote, "Thank you, Mr. Teo, for giving me hope. I want to be just like you when I grow up." Teo was moved to tears, knowing that his mother's legacy was touching lives in ways he had never imagined. He replied to the boy, encouraging him to work hard and believe in himself. Teo knew that his mother would have been proud to see how her story was inspiring others. Her love and strength had shaped his life, and now they were shaping the lives of countless others. Years later, Teo stood on stage, receiving a prestigious national award for his contributions to society. As he looked out at the audience, he felt the weight of his journey and the love that had brought him here. "This award," he began, "is not just for me. It's for my mother, who taught me everything about resilience, kindness, and courage. She showed me that no matter how hard life is, we can rise above it with compassion." The audience applauded, some wiping tears as they heard his heartfelt words. Teo felt his mother's spirit beside him, her strength flowing through him as he continued his journey to uplift others. He had transformed his own life and the lives of many, honoring his mother's legacy in ways that would continue for generations. As he looked up, he whispered, "Thank you, Mom. I hope I've made you proud." The room filled with applause, and Teo felt a profound peace. His mother's love had lit a path for him, and he knew he would carry her memory forward, ensuring that kindness, strength, and compassion would always be at the heart of everything he did.